bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.
Welcome into Game Week on SiriusXM. Well, each week we take a deep dive into the USL Super League, talking with coaches and players. Joined as always by Marion Crowder. I'm Anna Witte. Well, this week we dive into the two matches on match day 26 and talk about Carolina Ascent taking over that #1 spot in the table for the first time since November. And speaking of the Carolina Ascent, their head coach, Poole, joins the show. Marion, I think we've got a great one on tap. We're even talking about some potential playoff predictions. But before we dive into it all, how are you doing? How is springtime in Mississippi? Is it treating you well, or is the pollen getting to you?
The pollen has gotten to me and it's about to take my life. Let me just go ahead and tell you that much. We don't normally get spring in Mississippi. It goes quickly from Christmas to summer.
Bless your heart.
We've actually gotten a few weeks of like spring. Like I walked the dog this morning. It was kind of chilly. I was like, I don't really like this. My husband is like, oh my God, I'm so happy. And I'm like, you know what? Just give me 90 and give me a tan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Straight to 90?
Yeah, straight to 90. But, I hear that you had an eventful morning.
I had an eventful morning, Marion. I don't know how I came out. That's maybe why my hair looks like this, because I open up my sink to put my makeup on, do my hair, and this massive cockroach just crawls up next to my hair products and next to my makeup. It's springtime, right? Like they love living in these tight spaces. And my house is clean, guys. Don't worry. I keep a clean house. But there's like nothing worse to see them.
Like, honestly, I think, I don't know. I would be interested in the comments on this one to open up the show. Do we all agree that cockroaches are the worst creatures to exist? Yes or no? It's a hard yes for me.
Yes. Like this video, if it's a hard yes for you. Also, I'd say palmetto bugs really do maybe one up a cockroach because they're 2 times bigger and they can fly. Like, could you imagine that cockroach flying out from under your sink? No.
What if it like...
I would have burnt my house down is what I would have done. It would have been over.
I would have been doing the show alone, folks. So
yeah,
let's
guys,
all think.
I don't know. This mic would not exist anymore. Cockroach. So I'm here. I've made it. And we watched some really good soccer on match day 26. Carolina in particular, the Queen City Gals are back in the #1 spot for the first time since November. Mia Corbin had a brace in the win over Dallas. Now it's a triple-way tie for the Golden Boot race with 9 goals. And I think for Carolina, we saw a complete game for so many numbers. One in particular is defender Jill Aguilera, especially in the first half. I thought she did a great job of getting forward. But we're looking at this Carolina side who did a great job against Dallas, who were coming off of 2 clean sheets. So what did Carolina do so well to shift Trinity's backline constantly throughout the match?
Well, I think you alluded to it, right? And when we watch Carolina Ascent play at their best, one thing is going to be pretty common and pretty easy to pick out from the jump. And that's the ability to use the width, and not only use the width, but use the width in numbers. And so all the time in football, right, we talk about different kind of advantages, whether it's a positional advantage, whether it's numerical advantage, all of those things ring true and can always turn into different coaching philosophies. And one thing that I've seen consistently from Philip Poole is the use of numerical advantages in the wide spaces, right? And I actually, for those of us who are new to the show, Anna's actually a sideline reporter for Carolina Ascent. And Anna, one of the things that you talked about in one of your hits was the overlapping run. I think you were actually talking about it on Addie Merrick's side, but it was very present in Joe Aguilera's side as well. And I think that constant threat of and recognition, right, from the midfielders, from the front runners of Carolina Ascent to know, all right, this is the space we want to exploit. I've got to be there to support in these little triangle spaces. I thought it was excellent. And look, this is a Dallas team who we thought were unstoppable coming into this match. And truthfully, Carolina Ascent played them off the pitch.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, too, what I heard a lot from that match on Carolina's bench was not just Poole, but his entire coaching staff yelling 2-touch only. Like the constant ball movement from Carolina and off-ball movement allowed for that movement of Dallas's 3 center backs to be off guard the entire match. So kudos to Carolina getting the 3-0 win and getting that #1 spot currently in the Super League standings. Then we had Brooklyn taking on Tampa Bay in what was a match that Brooklyn was a lot more direct. They used their forward, Mackenzie George, a lot higher up the pitch, was able to use her in goal scoring moments. But we also saw a brace from Tampa Bay's Natasha Flint. She's now had 4 goals in 3 matches for Tampa Bay.
She's wild
It's
woman.
Insane. Tampa Bay, though, they've got 5 ties, a win and a loss in the spring season. And 5 out of those 7 games that Tampa Bay has played so far this season, they've been chasing games in terms of the opponent has scored first. So how can Tampa Bay in these last few games to push for a playoff position get on the score sheet first?
You know, it's Tampa Bay is in such an interesting position, right? Because they have players right now, and we've talked about it. We talked about in the start of the spring season how impactful their substitutes were. Then we talked about how Natasha Flint is getting going. And so there has been so much hype around the individual players that it's hard to step back and hear that stat, Anna, right? That actually from a collective, where are they realistically sitting? And if you would have blindfolded me and just based off some of the individual performances, I would not have said it is where you just said they were, really searching for a win and struggling to get full 3 points consistently. One of the things for me that I have seen them go in and out of is this idea of high pressure in zones like 10 through 15. And I actually think that it's something that Brooklyn did very, very well and was a turning point for them in the matchup this past weekend was when we break the field down into zones, 1 through 18. 1 through 9 are going to be in our back half, our defensive half, right? And then 10 through 18 are going to be in our attacking half. And when you look at zones, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, those are all going to be zones that go right from the halfway point to the top of the 18-yard box, okay? And so Brooklyn, to me, took a page out of what we saw Tampa Bay doing early in the spring season, which is the commitment to win, especially in, zones 11, 10, 12, and starting their attack from there. Yeah. We haven't seen Tampa Bay be able to do that, really win the ball in advantageous areas and go quickly to goal, right? Almost this idea, win your 50-50, win the ball in the midfield, transition quickly to goal, let your goal scorers work. Brooklyn did that, and I thought that it bode very, very well for them. And so I think, Anna, to get Tampa Bay back on scoring first, they're going to have to up their defensive responsibilities, especially in kind of that zone 10 through 15.
Up the pressure as well as they take on Fort Lauderdale United on Saturday, a Florida Derby where neither team has seen a win out of yet this season. Nice. We got plenty more to talk about. And before we push it to segment 2, I want to say that we are requesting Tampa Bay's Natasha Flint, hoping to get her on the show next week. So that will be a fun conversation with the high flying forward. Stick with us. We got plenty more to discuss on Game Week on Sirius XM.
Bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on Sirius XM FC.
Welcome back to Game Week on Sirius XM. We're making some bold playoff predictions here. I know it's just after match day 26, but you never know who's going to be in what spot. We're going to make those predictions, and we want to hear from you as well. But we also had some exciting announcements yesterday, actually, from the Super League. Playoff dates have been announced. The weekend of June 7th is when the semifinals will take place, and then the weekend of June 14th will be when the final takes place. So it'll be the number 1 seed against the number 4 seed, number 2 against number 3 in the semifinal, and this will all air on Peacock. On top of the playoffs, we also have superlatives being named. We've got the Golden Boot. Obviously, we've got Golden Glove, and we have Golden Playmaker, which is whichever player has the most assists on the season. And then after the playoffs wraps up, the fans will also be able to vote on the MVP and the Comeback Player of the Year. So we've got a lot of excitement down the pipe, really about, 2.5 months until the playoffs start to kick off. Marion, what are your thoughts on this exciting announcement?
I have so many thoughts. You just threw so much at the people. It feels so crazy to say we only have 2 months to the playoffs, but we also still have so much soccer to go. So when we get into predictions, everyone relax. Second of all, and this is going to allude to our conversation with Philip Poole. It is one thing to have more opportunities for people to play professional soccer on the men's and the women's side. It's another thing entirely to have it be in a sustainable fashion and have it be done in equality. And that's what we're seeing with the Super League right now. And a couple things that stand out to me, the superlatives, I know that that sounds so silly, but the fact that they are mirroring exactly what the top men's division gets is superb from the league. I absolutely love that. And we love fan interaction. We love giving the
Yes,
fans
we
a
do.
voice.
Snaps for
And
fans.
exactly. And then the second part of that is the fact that it can't be understated the value of having all of the Super League matches, including the playoffs, live on Peacock and available for replay. You've got everything you need in one place. And when I tell you that that is going to be something that you look back on and is a key part to the sustainability of this league, don't miss it. What they're doing and the fact that we have this already in year one is outstanding.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, because even President Amanda Vandervoort said one of the biggest accomplishments that they've had in year one is this Peacock deal.
Yep.
And it's coming full circle with being able to have the playoffs on Peacock as well. So stay tuned for more information. But until then, we're making some bold predictions. Let's just start with how many games these teams have left. We have Carolina in the number one spot, 21 matches. So does Brooklyn. They have 21 matches left. Carolina with 34 points. Brooklyn with 33 points, Tampa Bay, 20 matches played with 27 points. And then there's Fort Lauderdale, Dallas, Spokane, and Lexington, all 19 matches played. 32 points for Fort Lauderdale, 30 for Dallas, 22 for Spokane, and 16 for Lexington. Last up is DC. Currently in that last spot in the standings, they played 18 matches and they only have 15 points, but they do have 10 games to go. So number 1 through number 4 is the playoff positioning in 2025. Marion, let's start at the very bottom in that fourth spot. Who are you having there come June 7th?
It's hard, okay, because we have to base this off of something. We can go off vibes and we can go off feel, and I think there's a place for that. But I also think there's a place for crunching numbers a little bit like you did. So if I am looking at the remaining matches and the schedule intensity of those remaining matches, I am going to look at something that I'm deeming guaranteed points. And that's really your matches left against the bottom part of the table.
Yeah.
So if I look at that, my number 4 pick is going to be Tampa Bay. And here's why. Tampa Bay, 27 points. So right underneath that 30 mark, we're going to try to have to hit 40 and above, I think, to be in the number 1s and the 2s. So just FYI. 27 points right now, 24 available, and about 10 to 12 of those guaranteed, right? Those are those matches against the bottom part of the table. I really do think they have a very favorable stretch here coming up. If they can, again, like we talked about in the show earlier, if they can find a way to close matches out and get on the score sheet early, I think that they can take care of some of these as well.
Boom. I'm going with Tampa Bay in that fourth spot as well. Look at us. In sync. And just to add on that, I was between Tampa Bay and Brooklyn. Brooklyn hasn't won a game in the spring. And I think Tampa Bay takes that spot with the goal scores that they've had, the momentum that they've had. Tampa Bay certainly is going to be in a playoff spot. And I think they'll grasp that last one.
Yep. Well done. All right. So number 3, you ready for number 3?
Let's see number 3.
I'm gonna go Carolina Ascent. And it kind of pains me to do so because I do know how important having the home field for playoffs is for this group. But I hate to break it to you, Carolina Ascent fans, you've got arguably the toughest remaining schedule. You have done, and here's what my caveat is. You have done so well positioning yourself right at that 34-point marker. So if we're looking to get you to 40s and up, you're right there. Okay, so I don't really think it's a scare of making the playoffs per se. But outside of this DC power match, none of your 7 remaining matches are against the bottom teams in the table, right? So you've got 6 of your remaining 7 against the top 1 to 5. And that's tough. That's tough. So that's why I put them at 3.
Totally fair. I'm going with Dallas Trinity at number 3. They've got 9 games left here in the spring, and they're a team who they didn't have a ton of consistency in the fall, and then to start the spring, not much consistency at all, dropping early. But then they found this really nice streak against Brooklyn, and then the match against Carolina. So I'm just thinking Dallas doesn't have this ability to stay consistent through the spring. I do think they're going to be able to rack up a few more wins and a few more points. However, I don't see them hosting a playoff spot because of their inconsistency.
Fair enough, and very valid argument. Number two, Fort Lauderdale. I'm going with the girlies and arguably maybe my favorite kit of the Super League.
Okay.
I know. I just love the blue. That blue is so
It is
pretty.
nice, right?
Yeah,
Both of
so
the blues.
both of the blues. Both of the blues are gorgeous. If I'm looking at Fort Lauderdale right now, again, very similar to Carolina, I've done so well to get yourself above the 30-point marker. So 32 points. You've still got 27 available. So 9 matches still, which is second to only DC Power, who's got 10. Of those 9, you're looking at a kind of midpoint range of like 9 to 10
Yeah.
of those points being against the bottom teams in the table. So that being said, I think they're very average in terms of their difficulty down the stretch. I also think we have to talk about the fact that no one can really stop Jasmine Hamid or Shania Gordon that consistently. And so I think they get it done well enough to earn home field advantage.
I love your last thought on that. I'm going to bring that into my second spot, which is Carolina Ascent. The Ascent,
Okay.
that is one big thing that they have wanted and they've talked about since day one is that home field advantage in the playoffs. And I feel like Carolina has this on the forefront that they will end up being in that spot. And Carolina does so well against the top teams, in my opinion, of the league right now. I mean, they've got DC, Brooklyn, Spokane. Fort Lauderdale is the one game that I do see Carolina dropping just because I think, to your point, Hamid is a player who continues to get the job done for Fort Lauderdale. But Carolina having the big win against Dallas, results against Spokane. I'm going with Carolina in that number 2 place.
Yeah, and look, let's be fair, right? All of these and the fans listening out there, we want to hear your predictions because all of these are possibilities. Anna made a wonderful point about the fact that you have to look at the track record of what these teams have done against the top teams in the league. And although Carolina does have probably the toughest remaining schedule, they've proven that they really play up to their standard and to their level of play. I'm fine with that pick. All right, number one, and this is where we differ. I am going Dallas at the number 1 spot. I am. And this is purely because very similar to Fort Lauderdale, I do think they have some players who respond when it's clutch time, right? When it's go time and they understand that, hey, we want to host the first ever USL Super League playoff in the Cotton Bowl. I think they have the veteran leadership in the locker room, like we talked to Amber Brooks last week, but also from a mathematical standpoint, because we love maths. This is a math show.
We do,
okay?
yes.
We love the maths. All right, so they're already
women in STEM, Marion.
Right, women in STEM. That is us, me and Anna. Dallas, 30 points. Okay, so below the other teams that I've ranked lower than them, but they've got 27 still available. All right, so they're at the 9-match mark still available. And of those 9 matches, they've only got 4 of them against the top teams in the league. Okay, and if you look at the remaining matches, they're looking pretty good against teams in terms of historical matchups, in terms of getting the win. So I think that Dallas figures out the consistency. I think they figure out their rhythm, and they actually close us out at the number 1 spot.
I like it. And to be honest, I think these top 3 teams, like you could flip them anywhere come the end of the season, to be quite fair. But for me, I'm going with Fort Lauderdale United.
I didn't know if you were going to leave them out entirely or if you were going to put them all the way at number 1.
No, not with this recent form of Fort Lauderdale. But to be fair, there's so much parity in this league that you never know when a team like Spokane turns on the gas and they surprise all of us. I don't know. I mean, literally 1 through 8, they still have the potential to be in the playoffs. So we're not writing necessarily anybody off. Fort Lauderdale United, though, they've got Tampa Bay this week. They got DC coming up, Dallas, Carolina, Brooklyn, Lexington. Fort Lauderdale has just been in really consistent form. And I know losing Vaca is a huge loss to the backline of Fort Lauderdale United going out with an ACL injury. I just think Fort Lauderdale does have the depth in certain positions. Their ability to stay so consistent in the spring has been something that has challenged a lot of teams in the league. And Fort Lauderdale has lived up to those expectations. So I see Fort Lauderdale and Carolina hosting, Dallas and Tampa Bay hitting the road and playing that weekend of June 7th.
I'm not mad at any of this. And like we said, everybody, we want to hear your predictions. This is our version of March Madness, okay? And let me just tell you, one team that we didn't mention, well, Anna just alluded to them, and they've got some big-time matches coming up, is Spokane. And they're at 22 points, and that's why it's really hard to put them in our first iteration of these predictions, is because for whatever order Anna and I did, we're still looking at getting to the 40-ish point marker. Okay, so 22 points is where Spokane is now. That's a long way to go to get to 40, but Spokane is a common denominator on all of these teams' schedules. So it's not like Spokane hasn't done themselves a favor and given themselves places to go. They have put themselves in a place where I really think that they can take a lot of points and make the rest of this season quite interesting.
If you guys have playoff predictions, we would love to hear in the comments what you think. If you agree with Marion or I.
We know you don't. Don't worry.
No, yeah, we know you don't. But we want to hear your thoughts because, like we said, there's a lot of parity. There's a lot of teams who are winning at times that we don't expect and playing really nice matches at times that we don't expect. I would have never guessed when we started this show back up this spring that Brooklyn would go on this much of a tie/losing or a win drought, I should say. But here we are. It's the USL Super League, and we've got a few more matches coming up this week. Dallas and DC play tonight at 8 o'clock on Peacock, and then Thursday, Spokane will host Brooklyn at 9 o'clock Eastern time. Saturday is the big Florida Derby. We have not seen a win from Tampa Bay or Fort Lauderdale. That match will happen at 7 o'clock on Peacock. You look back at November, it was a 1-1 draw. February, a 2-2 draw. March, a 1-1 draw. And this is a Fort Lauderdale United team that's coming off of a week of rest. And then Tampa Bay, they're struggling in games to score first. So where do you see a team having to perform best this weekend in order to win that Florida Derby?
I think it's safe to say, and to tie this all into a nice, pretty bow, if you're a Spokane fan, you are a Fort Lauderdale fan as well this weekend. Because realistically, the closer that Spokane can stay to Tampa, the more likely they are going to be vying for that fourth spot. That being said, it is imperative that Tampa Bay get these 3 points, not only for the confidence, right, in the locker room, because when you're this close and when you're as close as they have been and you've seen stretches of absolute brilliance, but you haven't put it consistently together, you do that against your in-state rival, the confidence in the locker room goes through the roof.
Totally. I mean, we're looking at Fort Lauderdale with 32 points. If Spokane beats Brooklyn, they would move to 25 points. So 7 behind Fort Lauderdale, only 5 behind Dallas. And that's just post-match day 27. So there's still time for Spokane to find themselves in a really nice playoff positioning. And quite frankly, some movement to happen in the top. So really fun weekend of games. Make sure to tune in on Peacock, and you can stick with us here on Game Week. We have a really fun interview with Carolina's head coach, Poole. He comes on to talk about his thoughts on the women's game, why his team is finding some really nice form recently, and if he's getting into that Carolina book club. Don't go anywhere. It is Game Week on SiriusXM.
Bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.
Welcome back to Game Week on SiriusXM. We are now joined by Carolina Ascent head coach, Poole. Coach, thanks so much for joining us this week, and congratulations at being number 1 at the top of the table after match day 26. I know that you had been wanting to get that second and third goal, especially in the first half. You've been able to do that the last 2 matches. So what's been the shift for your team the last 2 games?
Well, first off, thanks for having us. You guys, really big fan of your show and what you guys do. And it's actually really cool to learn a lot about some of these players off the field. So thank you for what you guys do. Yeah, we've talked a lot about, we felt we've been really good in some games, created a lot of chances, but haven't really had the fortune of putting that second or third goal away. I'll go back to even our Fort Lauderdale game this second half of the season. It's very rare that I admit this, but I said to Tyrone after the game, hey, I hate to lose, but I really enjoyed that game. And we were good. We created chance after chance. We could have, should have put the game away several times. And, that game probably stung the most. So, with the players, they've worked so hard. And we've talked about, we'd rather be in the position of creating a lot of chances and not getting any looks. And with a bit more commitment and training and a little belief. And the players have been so good in training, been so committed. So for me, it all goes to them. That they've worked really hard. And it's nice for a couple of games now that the second and third have gone in. But it's our job now to see if we can continue that.
Yeah, I want to piggyback a little bit more off of what Anna said. And one thing that we've asked the players, we've asked several coaches that we've talked to, is obviously we're in a unique place in the Super League because the calendar is a little bit different. And it gives us kind of that midpoint in the season to not only reflect, right, as players, but as coaches, right, and see, what we can adjust, what we can do better. I'm curious, Anna's asking about what's changed in the most recent games, but I want to take you back even further. What do you feel like, if anything, changed from that fall season, the winter break, and then into the spring season?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in hindsight, right, I'd answer the question very differently now than maybe I would have a month ago or 2 months ago, which is, and some of my mentors would say the same thing, which is, what do you expect? You bring a new group of people together in a new league against unknown teams. You don't know what other teams are going to do. And so I had very high expectations for our team, for our players, or from the word go. And we achieved quite a lot in the first part of the season. But looking back, we still had a lot of work to do. There's part of me that feels we were maybe a little more organized than the next team coming out of the gate, which goes hand in hand with a good start. But I think that the big two things, Marion, for me are we needed a little bit more depth in certain positions, which we addressed that in the break in the transfer window, and then the other thing was we needed to make sure that we were really just focused more on us. Right. As coaches, we have a tendency to look at what you're doing and over plan and overthink and over coach and over everything. But really flip more to the 80-20 model, more about us, 80% about us, 20% about you. And I think that those two changes have been, I felt them. But yeah, I think that's the big change. So we added some depth. We focused much more on ourselves and opponents. And then the other piece, which was a huge difference maker, is we had a bit of an injury log, and we didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it because I wanted it to be opportunities for other players. And if you look at the last two Dallas games, right, we had 6 different players start this Dallas game than we had the last one, and I still think we're not at full strength. So I think those 3 things combined would probably say that's my assessment of where we were. And then, like I said to Anna, there's just been a lot of hard work from our players and commitment from our players on the training ground and out off the training ground. And I think you see things are in a good spot.
Yeah. And I think we've seen the league in general get off to a really good start and be in a really good spot right now. And we talked about matchups between you guys and WSL teams, what that might look like down the road. And you had said, there needs to be a separation in terms of where Super League is at and where other leagues are in the state. So how right now, in your opinion, is the Super League separating themselves from other leagues?
Yeah, I think we differentiate ourselves first and foremost with the calendar and the schedule, right? I think that's different, and it's actually really good when talking about building a club and building a roster and building a team when you put yourself in line with what everyone else in the world does. So we talk about first and foremost not necessarily competing, but just establishing who we are and being different. And I think Amanda and her crew have done a phenomenal job. We all know we have room to grow, and we all know the league will continue to grow. But I think, again, competition not being the first word, differentiating and figuring out who we are. And then as we start to grow on our and we get into potentially US Open Cups and we get into CONCACAF W Leagues, I think the competition elements will present themselves. Those gateway to competitions are going to be important. And then you start to move along a little bit further and go, the thought of the World Club Cup at some point. And having a fair opportunity to compete against the best in the world. And I think that's what kind of keeps you going, is that it's not about USL Super League and NWSL. I think NWSL have done a phenomenal job over the past decade and a half, and they've really kind of led the charge. But now it's about continuing to differentiate ourselves, continuing to figure out our identities, but use those competition mediums, whether it be Open Cup, CONCACAF W League, and eventually Club World Cup, to say, here's who we are and here's who we are, and this is what we do.
Open Cup is something I have been crying for on this show. I'm like, give us a women's Open Cup. I think it would be phenomenal. But I think that's so well said, because one of the, questions I had for you, and you are for the audience that doesn't maybe know you as well, you are someone that has coached at every level, right? And you have a very unique perspective on the women's game, in terms of the general landscape. And I think that's where like a lot of mine and Anna's interest comes in having you on this show, is seeing where Super League fits. But you just alluded to it, right? It's one thing to have opportunities. It's another thing to be able to grow in a sustainable way. And I think you alluded to several things that people don't even think about as ways to grow the league. So very well said. But it made me think, and this is a very, I didn't plan to ask you this, but it makes me wonder, when you're talking about all the places that Super League can go and just the women's game in general. We've always talked about Super League as what a cool opportunity to be a part of something new, right? Be a part of something that you can have your hand on. But as a head coach and as one of the first head coaches in the Super League, do you ever feel pressure to make it work or make it into something else?
No, no pressure. I think pressure is always there for any head coach of any sort of level.
Well
I
said.
think pressure is something that is a privilege. I know that sounds very quotey, but pressure is a privilege, right? I mean, I'm lucky enough that I get to do this for a job, and lucky enough that there is pressure, and pressure from results and scrutiny on results, which is a privilege. But no, I don't feel pressure, and partly is, and again, I didn't, have. You look at our. I can only speak about us, our ownership group, right? They are so committed to what we're doing. Our ownership group talk about legacy, and legacy is a nice, fun, cool word to throw around. But legacy to our principal owner means this club's going to be here in 50 years, and this club's going to be, doing great things in our community long after we're all gone and we're not part of it. So when you hear that from ownership, right, you can't help but feel confident and be excited and understand that this pressure is a real privilege, and it's a good thing, because we have our owners and our ownership group that talk about long-term and legacy. And then, when you underpin that, Marion, with just women's sports in general, right? You look at the WNBA projected revenue for this year, it being, surpassing $2 billion. You look at, yet more women's soccer specific stadiums and training grounds being built. And you look at, there's a new rugby league in our country. And, you just look at not just ourselves, but you start to spread your kind of your view a little bit, and you realize, yes, there are pressures, and yes, we all understand when we're going somewhere, but there's a movement here that is, now increased investment is increasing fans. More fans increases investment, and more investment creates more and more opportunities for everyone. So for me, I'm really happy to be a part of that. But pressure, no, it's a privilege.
Yeah, I think we saw it at your first home game ever. It was a sold out crowd, and that speaks a lot to what your team in particular is doing in the Super League. Coach, I know this is your first time since 2020 that you've been in a coaching role where you're working day in and day out with your team. So how does this role specifically challenge you differently than others?
That's a great question. And I've always wondered, right? So being with a national team, I can only describe it as 10 days, 6, sometimes up to 8 weeks of complete channel 24-hour day focus. And this being my first head coaching job in professional soccer, is that sometimes I look at them and go, okay, I think it's a little easier. They have a little more of a schedule, a little more easy going. And I actually believe I work more now than I did. And it's just, my staff and I, we get in the office around 7 a.m. and most nights we leave between 6:30 and 7 p.m. And there's a lot to do, and we're busy. And sometimes when I would step away from a national team camp, you could do your report, close the book, think about the next one. I feel with this job, I can't switch off, and it's 24/7. And I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a lot of excitement in my thoughts and planning and what can we do next, and looking at this player and that team. My wife and kids may feel differently. That sometimes like, can you just turn it off for 10 minutes? But the nice thing is, this is probably the biggest benefit, to answer your question, Anna, is, right behind the bench, I turn around and I see my wife and my 3 daughters, and they're our biggest fans. So for me to be able to combine the city I've always lived in, the game that I love, and my three daughters and wife be our biggest fans. I mean, for me, that's the benefit, and that's worth the extra hours, and that's worth the extra pressure, as Marion said. But yeah, different. But I actually feel if I log my hours, I'd probably work more in this job than I did in any previous job.
Speaking of previous jobs, if you had to take one lesson that you have learned from a younger Philip Poole or at a different stop along your coaching career that has made an impact with where you're at now, head coach of Carolina Ascent, top of the table, what would it be?
I believe strongly, Marion, it's about people. That if we're on a TV show or podcast talking about, I don't know, selling windows, I believe that it would be the people that are out there selling the windows, that if we can empower those people to be great and be better than they even thought they could be. It's about people, right? And that's a very coachy thing to say, but I describe myself as a coach. I love being around players. I love being around people. And I really took that to heart from my old job. Was I had a really good rapport with so many of our players with the national team, that when I left, I actually missed them. I'm still in contact with so many of them. But for me, it's about people, and it's about helping people to, part of our mission at the club is to celebrate every person's success, right? Whether that's in the marketing department, ticketing department, or someone making the team of the month. So it's about celebrating people. It's about empowering people. And I genuinely believe I've been lucky through a lot of research. You never know when you build a brand new roster. We're not a perfect soccer team. We're not a perfect organization. But I look at our squad, I look at our roster, I look at our locker room, and we've truly been blessed with amazing people, amazing leaders. And again, if we can put people like that together and we can have the mission of celebrating the success of those people, then we're onto something good.
Yeah, I've had the honor of being around of a lot of your players off the field, coach. And I'm not even kidding when I say this. Like, I can tell they genuinely enjoy each other's friendship and each other's company. Credit to you, too, because off the field, like that sometimes doesn't always happen when it's a first-time team and a first-time league. So what did your research look like to get this group of girls who seem so in sync with one another?
If I could answer that question, I would be a bazillionaire, right? Like, everyone wants to know
on
that
Shark
secret.
Tank.
Yeah, I wish. You know what? We're gonna write that book together. How I did this. Now, you know what? I wish I had some crazy. I think there's a little bit of luck there, right? Because everyone you call, right? You say, hey, I call Marion. I say, tell me about Anna Way, right? Is she any good? Is she a good person? No one's gonna say she's terrible. Stay away from her. And even if they say no, she's terrible, they're gonna say it nicely, or they're gonna leave. So, you watch a lot of video, you do a lot of speaking up and picking the phone up, and even people that they haven't played well for, maybe you get their opinion. So just the normal avenues of finding out about people. But honestly, I think there's like a gut instinct, right? My wife calls it your gut instinct is your guardian angel, right? It's very rarely wrong in any situation. And, you put the phone down and go, okay, I really liked that person. And my players will back me up with this is, I say this very tongue in cheek, and I hope doesn't come true. Is that if I'm not enjoying going to work, I'll get a different job. I mean, I'll get a different job because, what I did take from my old job to parlay these questions is, a soccer coach, football coach is what I do. It's not who I am, right? And I think that for me, I've got a clear identity of who I am, and I really want to enjoy the people I work with. My staff are unbelievable. They make me laugh. They drive me insane. My players do the same thing. And if I'm not enjoying my job, I don't think I'm the right coach for that situation. So I think that gut instinct and that guardian angel, when you do all your research and put the phone down, and maybe this is not a good way of doing this, and maybe it's too emotional, of saying, okay, do I like that person? I've done the research. I've looked at our criteria. I've looked at their number of games, injury record, what have they won, what do people say about them? And then my gut instinct says, do I like that person? Do I want to work with them? Because we spend a lot of time together as players, as coaches, and that's really the secret. I don't think that's a trade secret. I don't think it's going to sell many books on it, but really I think that's what it came down to, and a little bit of luck, right? You go with that instinct, and so far we've got a great group.
This is going to be an interesting question then, because you are such a people heavy person, right? There is, I feel like I don't want people to diminish the fact that you have very high standards as a football manager as well, right? So, I mean, off the pitch, I know is super important to you. On the pitch is also important to you. So the question I'm about to ask you, I feel like maybe a little difficult. If I was a player under Philip Poole, what will it take for me to be successful under you?
Well, that is a tough question, but I think I look at it like this, right? These players come to work every day and they give their heart and soul. They work and work and work, and I sometimes have to give them not so good news. I have to sometimes give them, tell them things they don't want to hear, and that's difficult for both parties. It's not something I enjoy, and I know it's not something they particularly enjoy. Yeah. But to succeed, you have to be open. You have to be willing to hear, and you have to be willing to learn and grow. And I think if there's a growth mindset there, if there's a hunger to get better, we don't talk about players needing to change their game. We talk about, let's add to your game. Let's see if we can make your game better. Let's see, I know what your super strength is, but can we make this part of your game a little better? And I think if there's an openness to grow and to improve, and a little bit of trust, Marion, right? Like, I think you have to build trust over time. But for me to have a really difficult conversation with you probably shouldn't happen after a week. I think you have to build some trust to say, listen, I need to tell you something. This is going to be hard to hear. But so I think there's a little bit of growth mindset. There's a little bit of wanting to improve. I think, again, we talk to players about adding to their game. I think there's some trust there in that. If I'm going to leave you out of a team this week, your life shouldn't crumble, right? If I've left you out of a team for 3 months, then okay, we've got some steps we have to take. So I think the first thing is the growth mindset. I think the other thing for me, and it's just my personality, is I'll tend to repel from negativity. If again, positive energy, I'd rather have a really difficult conversation with you right now, Marianne, and get it all out than let it fester. And sometimes that can be good or bad. So for me, growth mindset, high energy, and just the part of our mission, right? We want to win. We want to win things, and a competitiveness. And I shouldn't want to win more than you, right? We should want to win the same. So I think those three things come to mind. But they're three pretty big things for me.
Yeah, Coach. Love it. Thank you so much for joining us. I have to ask, are those books behind you product placement? Because you've got a ton of readers on your team. Are you looking to join this book club? Like, are you trying to subliminal messaging to them?
You know what? You caught me. These are just the ones I've read so far this year. So
yeah.
No, I am actually at my parents' house in England. We have 3 days off after the Dallas game. So I wanted to make sure that I zipped home for a couple of days to say hello and then get back to it. So just trying to use these breaks effectively.
Yeah, no, for sure. Are you reading any books? We got to know. Are you a big reader? Like, I feel like Porter's reading 100 books. I
was about to say.
I will never, ever, A, get an invite to the book club.
Oh.
B, if I did, I would hold that book club back. I can barely read. So I don't think book club's in my future. And I think Taylor will be just fine with that.
So you're watching The Bachelor with the girls then, is what I'm gathering from this conversation.
Again, I haven't had the invite. I'm sure it's coming. But no, I am the furthest from Bachelor and book club than you would get. I think you'll find me watching Lexington versus Spokane 3 times before I pick a book up and watch The Bachelor.
I know their topic of choice or whatever genre of choice is fantasy. That's what Mia told me. So I'm
Dragons.
with you. That's not my style. I like a good biography, but maybe it got lost in the mail. We'll check.
I'm sure you'll get an invite before I do. I can guarantee you that.
Okay.
That's probably true.
Probably very
No
true.
offense. No offense. I love you, I'm sure.
Coach, really appreciate the time. Safe travels home this week, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Game Week. You can tune in every single Wednesday, either on the USL YouTube page or on SiriusXM. Please leave a comment. Let us know what your playoff predictions are, what games you're looking forward to this weekend. And until then, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
You've been listening to USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.